Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren, hier in der Max-Lehner-Stiftung. Vielen Dank für Ihr Interesse. Wir haben heute eine besondere Veranstaltung. Wir haben einen ukrainischen Gast. Wir haben bei uns zu Gast Professor Svetlana, die uns über die Moderne in der Ukraine einen Vortrag halten wird. Und ich freue mich auch sehr, dass Professor Pottgiesser in Delft und Detmold-Lippe ansässig, also zumindest arbeitsmäßig, und unser früherer Landeskonservator Professor Jörg Haspel die Moderation dieses Abends und auch die Vorstellung von Svetlana übernommen haben. Herzlich willkommen. Ich kann selber berichten, dass ich die große Freude hatte, zweimal Svetlana in Charkiv, in Charkow zu besuchen. Wir haben zusammen eine Exkursion nach Zaporož'e gemacht, nach Zaporož'e, und uns verbindet also eine jahrelange berufliche und freundschaftliche Beziehung. Und umso schöner ist es, dass Sie jetzt hier vorübergehend in Berlin wohnend uns auch diesen Vortrag geben kann. Herzlichen Dank, Svetlana. Und ich darf bitten, unsere Moderatorinnen das Pult zu übernehmen.
Ja, guten Abend allerseits. Wir haben uns darauf verständigt, dass wir das im Wechsel im Duett hier machen, so wie wir auch die Moderation übernommen haben. Und dass ich anfangen darf, Svetlana Smolenska vorzustellen, die ich schon seit einigen Jahren kenne, und zwar nicht als Berliner Landeskonservator, sondern in meiner damaligen Eigenschaft als Mitglied des Internationalen Denkmalrats ICOMOS, wo wir uns kennengelernt haben in Florenz, und Svetlana dann auch Mitglied wurde in einem internationalen wissenschaftlichen Komitee zum 20. Jahrhundert für die Ukraine, und wir eine ganze Reihe von gemeinsamen Aktivitäten, Veröffentlichungen und auch Projekten haben, wo es nicht um die Ostmoderne im Sinne der Nachkriegsmoderne ging, sondern um den Beitrag zur Moderne, der Avantgarde-Architektur, des Konstruktivismus, dann aber auch sozusagen der stalinistischen Architektur. Frau Smolenska ist ausgebildete Architektin, hat Architektur studiert, später auch promoviert und zuletzt gelehrt an der Technischen Universität und Technischen Hochschule in Charkiv und hat in dieser Zeit eine ganze Reihe von Publikationen gemacht, insbesondere zu Charkiv selbst, aber auch zu anderen Orten und zur Moderne und dann auch zur Ablösung sozusagen der Moderne in den 30er Jahren. Und als diese Ereignisse im Februar sich anbahnten und wir bemerkt haben, dass Charkiv da besonders von bedroht ist, haben wir Kontakt aufgenommen, und ich bin sehr froh und dankbar dafür, dass es gelungen ist, mit der Hilfe von Thomas Flerl und dem Architekturmuseum hier mit Herrn Nägelke hier eine Möglichkeit zu schaffen, dass sie hier nicht nur unterkommen, sondern tatsächlich auch arbeiten, ein Projekt übernehmen kann. Und damit darf ich schon weitergeben an Mutter Pottgiesser.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Haspel. Und ich habe überlegt, ob ich vielleicht in Englisch weitermache. Dann kann auch Svetlana verstehen, was wir hier über sie erzählen. So Svetlana, I just said that I will switch into English so that you can also understand how we present yourself. So after Jörg Haspel has explained how he met you earlier in his function as ICOMOS in Ukraine, and about your work about ICOMOS, for ICOMOS, but as a teacher and architect in Ukraine. It is my pleasure to have you here and to being involved in, let's say, designing and creating the time that you will spend here. So, and it was actually Thomas Fleer and Jörg Haspel, and together with Hans-Dieter Nägelke, who made the contact when you arrived here to Berlin to see for further funding. So we are also lucky that after the funding that the Architecture Museum was providing to do research, we also have a funding of the Volkswagen, the foundation, for 1 year to do research on one of your beloved projects, which is the famous international competition for a theater in Charkiv that took place in 1930, for a theater that was never built, but that was a very international competition where architects worldwide contributed. And we are very curious, I think, on what your research in different countries in Europe, and we already know about some Japanese contributions will bring to light, and what kind of new, I think this is very interesting, of new international cooperations, because this Ukrainian competition really showed how international the world was in the 1930s and how much Ukraine was also connected with the world, and how the design was internationally influenced. And I think this is why we are very happy to hear your presentation now about the international, about the modernism in Ukraine, not only in Charkiv, but in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the floor is yours, Professor Smolenska.
First, I want to express my gratitude to my colleagues, thanks to whom I'm here and I have the opportunity to speak to you today. They are here, Jörg Haspel, Thomas Fleer, Uta, Pottgiesser, and of course Dieter Migelke, and many another colleagues helps me here in that hard period. And thank you very much. Please, I should move it, yes? No? I should start from the beginning. I should find it. Okay. Do you see? I put in quotation marks part of the title of the lecture for a reason. This is a quote. It is a borrowed from foreign authors. For the first time, I came across this definition in a French edition of the early 30s, and then the famous Greek-French architect Candilis titled his article in the journal L'Architektur aujourd'hui in the 60s. Almost 90 years later, I'm inclined to agree with this definition and try to convince you of this. Maybe then you will find the answers to the burning questions. What is the uniqueness of the industrial, civil, and residential Ukrainian architecture of those years? Should it be kept? What was heroic in the architecture of Ukraine and Kharkiv? Here are the few figures for starters. The world-class Kharkiv tractor plant produced 50,000 tractors a year with dozens of industrial buildings, was built in just 15 months in 1930-31, which was a world record for the pace of construction at that time. Another example is the city of 1,000 inhabitants, New Kharkiv. This is one of the districts of modern Kharkiv now. It was designed in 1930, in 40 days, by a group of young architects and students. Today, current students do their master's projects for about 2 years. And there was a whole city there, a most complex organism with all its infrastructure, residential buildings, schools, hospitals, clubs. Already these figures speak of heroism, but it was not only the speed of construction or its scale. To understand the heroism of that time, let us first single out the extraordinary difficulties of this period, which had to be overcome at that time. It was the most difficult political situation in all of Europe and on the territory of Ukraine in particular. The First World War brought with it an economic recession, death of the able-bodied young population, and became an activator of a wave of revolutions that shocked Europe. Political revolutionary passions were seen in Ukraine, which culminated in the formation of the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic with Charkiv as its capital, which in 1922 became part of the UdSSR as an independent republic. Ukraine used to be part of Russia, and Western Ukraine belonged to Poland until 1939 and partly to Romania and Czechoslovakia until 1940. Secondly, economic stagnation after the First World War. Agriculture is in decline, hunger. People have nowhere to work, nowhere to live. This was the case throughout Europe. It was even worse in Ukraine. The economic decline of the country as a consequence of the First World War and the revolutionary events of 1917. That was also devastation due to intervention and civil war that swept through its territory. A significant part of the housing stock, industrial enterprises, and transport facilities was destroyed. They began to gradually restore and repair in 1921-22. The construction industry was virtually non-functional. Building materials were scarce. There were no metal, concrete, and even traditional bricks due to the destruction of brick factories. Only 1925-1926 can be considered the years of new capital construction. Therefore, the time frame of early avant-garde modernism in the UdSSR and Ukraine falls in the mid of 1920s and early 1930s. The period was very short. I want to give an example. In the early 1920s, it was necessary to restore the chain bridge across the Dnipro River in Kiev, blown up during the war. Evgeny Patton, a Ukrainian engineer and scientist known for his work in the field of bridge building, structural mechanics, and welding, proposed to apply a different modern constructive idea using the pillars of the old bridge and, as he wrote in one of his articles, two beams collected from warehouses along the banks of the Dnipro, left over from wartime. These metal beams were exceptionally large calibers. They were not intended for bridge building. There was simply no other metal, and he did it. He had no choice. You see a view of the Evgenia Bosch Bridge in the 1920s. It was opened to traffic in 1925. Its length was 675 meters, a width of 11 meters. The bridge was continuous span structure with 4 spans each of 134 meters, 2 spans about 70 meters each. Thirdly, the possibilities of construction equipment, the carrying capacity of building mechanisms, and their technical capabilities were limited. many processes at construction sites were done manually. For example, shelves, crowbars, and picks were the main tools and were widely used in the construction of the famous high-rise reinforced concrete building of Gazprom in Kharkiv. You can see horse-drawn carts in the photos of those years. Finally, there were problems with the low standard of the living and the poor sanitary situation in the cities. People did not have basic amenities, running water in their houses. The streets were not paved. There were not telephone, etc. This is what provincial Kharkiv looked like at the end of the 19th century. Even the late even in the late of 1920s, one-story buildings prevailed in the big cities of Ukraine. Stone and brick houses accounted for less than one-third. The rest of the houses were wooden or clay. And what served as an impetus for progress, forward movement in architecture and urban planning, and what pushed ordinary people to heroism. Let's try to highlight here a few reference marks that will help us to find answer. The era of industrialization had begun. It was another inevitable stage in the development of mankind and a new era on a global scale. It began, first of all, with the most developed countries, Great Britain and America, and then covered many other European countries. The Industrial Revolution opened up new opportunities for the mass production of things, cars, and houses accessible to everyone. That is why it was so close to the social ideas, to equality and the availability of live goods for everyone. The Industrial Revolution gave impetus to the emergence of the new technologies, building materials and structures. This required, in turn, a radical revision of the principles of architecture, construction, and urban planning. Advanced architects and engineers understood this, but not all of them. Many architects preferred to camouflage modern buildings designs with historical styles, and engineers often became pioneers in architecture and construction, whose task was to apply new materials and look for extraordinary constructive solutions for industrial production problems, to block large spans, illuminate huge production areas with natural light, and build giant silos and water towers. The architecture of industrial buildings was the most progressive. In addition, the Industrial Revolution gave impetus to the unprecedented growth of the cities, industrial centers. In this regard, ideas for solving the problems of such extraordinary growth began to appear. The linear city of Spanish engineer Soria y Mata, the garden city of the Ebenezer, the industrial city of the French architect Tony Garnier, large town architecture by Ludwig Hilberseimer, a German architect and urban planner, urban functionalism of Le Corbusier, etc. Ukraine was becoming an experimental platform for the construction of such cities. The idea of socialism, equality, was so closely associated with the industrial age. Conveyor production of the same things, cars and houses, dramatically reduced their cost and made them accessible to everyone. That is why in countries where social national revolution took place, modernism was developed and supported. In Germany during the Weimar Republic, in Soviet Union before 1933, in Czechoslovakia after independence, and so on. What was the goal of the famous Bauhaus School, which centenary was celebrated by the whole world in 2019? To create fundamentally new aesthetic for mass production, things, furniture, and houses available for mass consumption. Now let's go back to Ukraine in the 1930s, 1920s, early 30s. It also seems incredible that modernism, constructivism as it also was called, in the UdSSR and Ukraine lasted a very short period, less than a decade. That is why its achievements are so impressive. Its time frame falls into the mid-1920s and early 1930s. On the one hand, it was limited by the wars and devastation of the beginning of the century. On the other hand, by changes in politics, when in the early 1930s, the authorities forcibly changed the style of architecture to pompous neoclassic socialist realism and began to persecute modernism and its supporters. So after 1922, the Republic was in ruins, but it had a huge potential. The availability of labor and natural resources, transport opportunities, a good geographical location, and most importantly, hopes for revolutionary transformation of society, gaining national independence. Ukraine took one of the key positions in the process of industrialization in the whole country, what began in the second half of the 1920s. Significant material resources were directed here for the construction of industrial giants and energy and transport facilities. The map of the capital construction objects of the European part of the UdSSR for the 5 years from 1928 to 1933, and the control figures for the construction of new cities prove that Ukraine at that time was a leader among another republics. You see on the map the place of concentration of green dots. This is the territory of Ukraine. Pioneer in the terms of design and the largest industrial and transport facilities in Europe, civil facilities and entire cities begin to be built here. I want to give just a few examples. Design and construction of a new powerful hydroelectric station in Dnipro River in Ukraine, Dnipro Gas, was innovative and grandiose. Engineer Ivan Alexandrov was the author of the idea of a giant complex which included dams, sluices, hydroelectric station, a transmission network, the river harbor, etc. Some figures show the gigantic scale of the construction, which was completed in 1932. Construction was completed in just 5 years. The volume of concrete placed in the Dnipro dam was 820,000 cubic meters. Its length 760 meters, height 62 meters, maximum width at the bottom 40 meters. The highway at the top of the dam connected both banks of the river. The advanced experience of the mass application of reinforced concrete structures of the Dnipro has been used subsequently on many buildings in Ukraine. The competition to design the building of the hydroelectric station was announced in 1929. The project of the group of architects led by Viktor Vesnin was voted the best. It was a monumental horizontal block of 20 meters in height and plan dimensions of 231 by 22 meters. It leaned in massive concrete pillars. The exhausted water used by turbines splashed out between them. A large glazed bay window was located along with the building. According to the author's concept, it had to illuminate naturally the machine hall and allow workers to have a connection with nature. The glass bay window on the facade contrasted with a wall encased by reddish Armenian tuff. Dnipro building is considered one of the best examples of Soviet modernism. A system of power lines transmits electricity to factories and mines. An industrial hub with giant factories was being built near Dnipro based on cheap electricity. Advanced design solutions were used in their design. Monolithic reinforced concrete thin shells were used in 1931 during the construction of the electrolysis shop in the Dnipro aluminium plant. The workshop had 6 identical buildings measuring 165 by 33 meters each, of which was covered with 14 elliptical vaults 6 centimeters thick. The issue of housing for the workers of Dnipro and industrial enterprises was one of the key ones. Separate settlements were built first. The so-called 6 capital settlements designed by Viktor Vesnin Group became the most striking phenomenon in the housing construction in the late 1920s and early 1930s in Ukraine. The idea of the garden city and the line building were vividly reflected in it. Modernism, subsequently enshrined in the Athens Charter, were fully embodied. The 6 capital settlements was built almost completely by the early 1930s. Wide avenues, green residential areas, modern architecture of residential buildings, clubs, hospitals, a cinema, libraries, and other buildings are captured in the photos of those years that you can see. Regional planning was born at that time. Its goal was the planned use of territories, the regulation of all types of construction, and the creation of better living conditions for the population of individualized economic regions. For example, the regional planning scheme for Donbass in Ukraine included 13 new cities with a total population of up to 1 million people. Architects from Germany, Ernst May and his team, Mark Stam from Holland, and others took part in the design of the social cities Korolivka and Makivka and Donbass. They especially came to the UdSSR in 1930 to bring their modernist ideas to life. Charkiv had the status as the first capital of the Soviet Ukrainian Republic from 1919 to 1934. That short but a bright segment of the city's history had essentially changed its appearance, spatial and social structure of the provincial city, lifestyle thinking of its citizens, and direction of a vector of its development at the center of the science, culture, and education. Before the revolution of the 1917, Charkiv was built up of one-story houses by almost 90%. In the 1920s and 1930s, it became the third most important city of the Union, and after Moscow and Leningrad, the largest industrial center in 1931, compared with 1913, its industry increased 14 times. Expressive is the comparison of population growth diagrams in the main cities of the UdSSR. You can see Kharkiv, Moscow, Kiev, and Rostov. As you see, Kharkiv holds the lead. New industrial facilities were reconstructed and built here according to the most advanced technologies of that time. An example is the main building of the Charkower turbine generator plant. It was one of the largest concrete structures in the world, 1 million cubic meters in volume, 30,000 cubic meters of concrete were used in its construction. The project was developed by Ukrainian specialists from Industry Trust under the leadership of Alexander Mirovetsky, engineer. The building had dimensions of 144 by 328 meters and 5 spans. The image of Kharkiv, the industrial giant, where all was progressive, amazing imagination of contemporaries. Living, working, reinforced concrete Ukraine, Kharkiv, buzzing with the capital, bandaged in railways. These lines, written by famous poet Vladimir Mayakovsky after his several visits to the city in 1927 are transferred in the pressed form not only a rhythm, a spirit of the city, but visual and even tactile perception of the image, reinforced concrete. It's nothing like a characteristic of Soviet avant-garde so clearly declared itself in the city's architecture. Separate buildings and whole new residential areas, even modest park wooden structures, bore the imprint of new style. Even though not all of the constructions were built of reinforced concrete, however, innovative engineering ideas, functional planning decisions, and modern methods of architectural composition were being welcomed, and they were winning numerous competitions and were being implemented just there. Probably Kharkiv was a unique city in the UdSSR with so bright, pronounced avant-garde architecture. Scales and rates of its growth impressed more than the achievements of Moscow and Leningrad then. In those two major centers of the Union, numerous new constructions were being lost in existing buildings. Kharkiv was much smaller. The most considerable new civil building was concentrated in the Northland, in upland areas of the city. They were the city outskirts, created a new image of the Ukrainian capital. Kharkiv is spread widely, has girded itself with a dense network of railways, has crossed streets by tramways, was bounded the earth with asphalt, has exploded its teeth as stone digest. What has been quite recently is disturbed now by fuzzy noise of propellers, buses, taxis, trams, colorful storefronts, cafes, theaters, cinemas, illuminated advertising, hoardings. The city is noisy, the city is nervous, the city of factories, the capital of Ukrainian SSR, the cultural and political center of the great country. Who could believe that a few years ago Kharkiv was just a quiet province with a pretty bourgeoisie and bureaucratic way of life? This is a description of Kharkiv from the Universal Journal published in 1928. The new high-rise administrative center, the Dzerzhinsky Square, with the advanced multi-story building residential area, was set up there. It dominated the entire city, and its old center was located lower at the confluence in the rivers Kharkiv and Lopan. It has essentially changed the spatial structure and silhouette of the city. So you can see it in the previous picture on the left hand, a new administrative center of the Dzержinski Square is being formed. On the right, the chemical building of the university is being completed in a constructivist spirit, architect Kravitz. As you can see, modernism has penetrated even into the old historical center of the city. The ensemble of the Dzержinski Square, Svoboda Square, now was formed step by step in the process of competitive design of each building. The competitive struggle provided the opportunity to select the most successful decisions for the future ensemble. From the building of state industry was the first and the main building of the future ensemble. It was a multifunctional complex for a multitude of the offices of industrial, financial, and administrative trusts and institutions which were concentrated in the capital. The competition was announced in 1925. The project, proposed by architects Sergei Serafimov, Samuel Kravitz, and Mark Felger, was recognized as the best. The complex erection lasted from 1925 to 28. The Rom was a grandiose construction for its time. Its volume totaled 347,000 cubic meters. It had from 5 to 13 floors, and the total area of all was 67,000 square meters. The House of Cooperation in the northern part of the Dzержinski Square was accepted for construction by the architect Dmitriev project. House of Projects, the design organization center by architects Serafimov and Zeinberg Serafimova, first prize in the competition in 1929, was selected to be built in the southern part. The circular part of the Dzержinski Square was formed by those three high-rise buildings. A new residential area in the modernist style had already been constructed behind the Prom. The Hotel International, the largest hotel in the city and in Ukraine, formed the joint of the circular and rectangular parts of the square. Architect Jörg was the winner in the competition in the project in 1928. At the same time, architect Jakob Steinberg reconstructed two old buildings on the Karl Liebknecht Street, Smolenska Street later. He combined two buildings into one, designed for the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine. It completed the perspectives of the square on the part of the main street. Thus, a modernist metropolitan ensemble of the square, a grandiose for its time, found its form before World War II. Only the erection of the House of Cooperation was not completed then. Even today, Svoboda Square is, Dzержinski Square in the past, is one of the largest city center square in Europe. Its size amounts to about 12 hectares. The length is 750 meters. The diameter of the circular part is 350 meters. Architect Lombard and sculptor Manizer won the international competition to design the monument for the Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. which adorned Shevchenko Park and the main Karl Liebknecht Street not far from the square. Construction of the multi-purpose 4,000-seat musical theatre, the biggest in Europe, was started in Charkiv at that time. In those years, the largest theatre in Europe was the Milan Opera House, 3,000 seats. The international competition in the theatre project was held in 1930. 144 design submissions were received. 100 were from overseas. Known architects from USA, Japan, French, Italy, Sweden, Germany, and other countries included Walter Gropius, Hans Pelzig, Bell Getz, and many others participated in the competition. That event of world value would enrich the history of the development of theatrical construction. A new type of modern theatrical building was envisaged. Since scene and hall transformations would permit any kind of theatrical action from drama performance to ballet, circus representation, or mass activities involving the participations of a great number of actors and spectators. Cinema, acoustic sound options, lighting, and other means would also be widely used. Another grandiose construction was started in the capital of Ukraine in the early 1930s. A huge sport complex with a stadium for 80,000 spectators. It was supposed to be a complex with many different sports facilities located in a beautiful park area of 280 hectares. Its international status could be attributed to it due to its enormous size and compliance with international standards. Kharkiv architect Nikolai Zvigilsky was the author of the project called the Petrovsky All-Ukrainian Physical Cultural Center in Kharkiv. The stadium with the spectator standards was its heart. It also included a cycle track with a cycling and ski station, a palace of physical culture, swimming pool measuring 50 by 20 meters, a children's sector, and so on. Places of mass cultural and educational work and a theater for 2,500 people were located near the main entrance. The Institute of Physical Culture, hostels and hotels were to be located on the territory. More than 60 clubs for employees of different specialties were presented in Kharkiv in the early 1930s. Some of them were new, and they, of course, were built in modernist style. Builders' Club was one of the first and most interesting among them. Its project was published in the foreign architectural press. The country yard was its composite center. It served as an open-air hall. It was possible to get to different functional parts of the club from that central point. the combination of vertical and horizontal volumes overhanging the second floor above the path to the courtyard, semicircular glass stairs, flat roofs, and round windows on the ground floor all created an original modern architectural image. New Charkiv, the residential neighborhood for Charkiv tractor factory, was another experimental building site on 600 hectares. In 1930, Professor Pavel Alyoshin got involved in the work with his talented team of vigorous young architects and students to develop the project. Social City, as it became known, had typified the progressive ideas of that time. The linear character of planning, creation of the green sanitary protective zone between industry and residential settlement, differentiation of apartment buildings according to the demographic structure of the population, etc. Functionalism and constructivism left traces of the design decisions of the master plan, composition and appearance of buildings of the complex. Blocks of houses had been provided with service and support facilities, kindergartens, schools, polyclinics, clubs, etc. The authorities of the Ukrainian UdSSR pursued a policy of so-called Ukrainization in the 1920s, which played a positive role in the national revival of the country. It's so-called also Red or Ukrainian Renaissance. According to some modern Ukrainian scientists, in the 1920s, thanks to the policy of Ukrainization, the impetus of which was given by the national liberation struggle of the previous time, culture in Ukraine has taken an important step towards overcoming provinciality, was organically included in the world art process that created significant artistic value. Ukrainization, transition to the Ukrainian language of elementary schools covered the entire Ukrainian population of the Republic by the end of 1927. The Ukrainization of press reached about 70% in 1930 and about 90% in 1932. Many Ukrainian language publications published news from the field of architecture and urban planning, New Generation, Soviet Theater, Socialist Kiev, Universal, the professional journal Budivnictvo, Construction. Ukrainian cinematography developed then. Alexander Davzhenko was a world-famous film director of that time. Ukrainian literature, sculpture, scenography, and monumental painting were developing also. Vasil Yermilov is a leader of constructivism in Ukrainian visual arts. He was engaged in the development of small-scale architecture, advertising three-dimensional objects, interior design, book graphics, etc. The Ukrainian Renaissance gave a strong impetus to national development and covered various spheres of life, education, science, literature, and art did not bypass architecture. In the early 30s, the stage of generating formal aesthetic avant-garde ideas in architecture reached the height of their realization. Many projects were completed or were in erection stage. The strengthening of totalitarian tendencies in power in the 1930s led to a ban on modernism in architecture throughout the UdSSR and in Ukraine. The turn to the classics in architecture and urban planning was reflected in the appearance of Charkiv and other Ukrainian cities. Existing buildings throughout the country were redesigned hastily, squaring new neoclassical facades. Simultaneously, in 1934, the capital of Ukraine was transferred from Kharkiv to Kiev. Grandiose construction projects in the city, such as a theater for 4,000 seats and the stadium for 80,000 spectators, were stopped and never completed. Between 1941 to the liberation of occupied Kharkiv in August 1943, the city had suffered very much. More than 1 million square meters of living space had been destroyed. Many public and industrial buildings were also ruined and lost forever. In the process of post-war reconstruction, the second half of the 40s, in the first half of the 50s, many modernist buildings changed and received neoclassical facades. Before World War II, the ensemble of Dzerzhinsky Square accumulated the best features of the modernist style, but after the war, it was almost completely rebuilt in the spirit of socialist realism, the official style in architecture at that time. Only Держпром kept its authenticity. Reconstruction, renovation, and expansion of buildings in 1960s, 80s, of updating and or changes of function, as well as modern distortion from the 1990s till now today, nowadays continued the process of losing authenticity by modernist buildings and complexes. It seems that after gaining independence in 1991, Ukrainian society should revise its opinion of the heritage of modernism and try to ensure it remains authentic. But the authority leave unpunished the worst cases of distortion of our modernist heritage. Private businesses and separate owners rent or buy some parts of entire floors of the building and change them according to their tastes. The war with Russia today brought new losses. You can see it. This is the historical center of Kharkiv this spring. The famous ensemble of Svoboda Square also suffered. The building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration in the Svoboda Square was the most damaged. A shell exploded near it. This photo went around the world mass media. The building was badly damaged. You can see in the original photos I took 2 months ago how serious these destructions are. Windows window frames and glazing in most of the buildings of Svoboda Square ensemble, as well as in adjacent residential buildings, were damaged by the explosion. Subsequently, the windows openings were covered with chipboards. Until now, Dersprom is the best preserved. It is located farthest from the explosion. Automatic Telephone Exchange, ATE, a well-known heritage site of the modernism, is located at a distance of only 1 block from the Svoboda Square on Svoboda Street. In this war, a bomb hit a residential building opposite the street, an architectural monument of the early 20th century. As you can see, the ATE suffered from the explosions as well. The heritage of modernism suffered in another part of Charkiv as well. Khan Magomedov, a recognized researcher of the Soviet architectural avant-garde, included this building, the Palace of Culture of Railway Workers, in the list of 100 of its masterpieces. It also received damage to the side facade. Today, not only Kharkiv, but also other cities in the southeast of Ukraine are suffering from the war. First of all people, but also the architectural heritage left to us by previous generation. It can be stated that modernism in Ukraine and in Kharkiv was a very short period in the history of architecture, almost a decade. It reached its peak in the early 1930s. Ukraine and Kharkiv modernism were losing their authenticity over the next 90 years. Those buildings that have retained their original appearance are destroyed by wars, time, and people, and the absence of the effective state policy to preserve the heritage of the 20th century. Modernism in Ukraine and Kharkiv was a unique phenomenon at the European level. It must be preserved and restored for European culture as far as possible. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this really very inspiring and informative presentation of the situation and of the history of this short period of heroic modernism in Charkiv and in Ukraine in general. I think it was, for all of us, it was very interesting, and some facts are totally new, and it's very important, even if it is because of the war and because of the political situation, that we become more and more aware about the qualities and about the architecture in Ukraine. And you mentioned it at the end, it's part of our European identity and a part of our European heritage, which should be included. And I think we need this kind of exchange to become aware of it. Maybe I can start with one question, because I found it very fascinating when you mentioned this kind of Ukrainization or of Ukraine renaissance. what was the motive, what was the aim of this kind of Ukrainization? Was it something like a movement against the predomination of the Russian part and of Russian modernism or avant-garde architecture, or what was behind it that a kind of a regional modernism was propagated and supported in this phase?
You mean in architecture?
In architecture and design, in music, you mentioned it, that there was a general tendency not only to say it's a part of the union of the socialist Soviet republics, but to say it's something specific, so it's a new confidence in the regional history and regional tradition from a modern point of view. That was what I found fascinating, to say modern architecture and modern design and modern art is not a globalized international cosmopolitan phenomena, but it is always rooted to the situation and to the country and to the people. And my interest was what are the motives behind it, and why, or is this a phenomenon which has taken place in all the Soviet republics, for example, in the Soviet Union, or is it something specific for the Ukraine?
It is hard to explain. Do you see? It was at the time to identity of national identity, maybe, and so many people, Ukrainian people, try artists, sculptors, architects, try to take part in that world process of modernism as an international movement, and they try to be an equal part of that. And it was really because many of them created something very special, of course, because of their talent, because of their national identity. And they gave that works as a part of international movement, it seems to me.
So the international movement in Ukraine was something like a national modern movement, which is part of the global movement.
Yes, yes.
And it became also progressive.
Yes,
it was not only, let's say, a second position of modernism, but it was modern avant-garde, which was...
They created something equal of whole movement. See, they gave their...
Maybe I like to add to that, or to add another question to that, because you work on this competition and you showed how many international, but of course also Ukrainian and maybe Russian architects took part. And
yes,
of course now we have again this discussion about what is, you showed it in the maps, what is historically was part of Ukraine was Poland, part of Ukraine was Russia. Now there is Ukraine. How was the situation in this short period between 1920, 25 and 30, 32? I mean, what was the origin of these architects? Because they were Ukrainians, they were, of course, Russians, or some of them were educated in Moscow, I guess, because I don't know when was the Charkiv school founded. Because this is a very hot topic nowadays, you know. What is the, I don't know, identity?
Do you see, Ukraine, it's really true that Bauhaus is a main place where new generation, modernist generation were growing, yes. And of course, Moscow and that school also as a constructivism, the point of the main center. But Ukraine was a territory to implementation of that ideas. And because of that, it was so interesting territory for many different architects from different countries, because it was very progressive in architecture and construction, and so many ideas they could realize here. And at the beginning, for example, I remember the history of that square. The first competitions, the winners were from Leningrad, and 3 high-rise buildings. You see, Gazprom, House of Cooperation, a House of Projects. The winners were from Leningrad. But later, the authors of the next 2 buildings, Hotel and CCCPU, it were Ukrainian architects from the Ukrainian schools. It was school, enough famous school in Charkiv, and another one in Kiev. And yes.
So you also want to say that,
and in Odessa also 3 schools, very famous schools.
Because of course often we think about Moscow, the Moscow school, Putumas, as the most important one. But maybe it was not that important at that time, because I think this expression that you said, it was a field of implementation. So this was the place where all these ideas could be realized. And thus it was not so important, because all of them probably felt as part of this more global movement of modern movement. Yeah.
And maybe you mentioned that in 1934 Kiev became the capital instead of Charkiv. So in these years between 1990 and 34, it was not only the capital, as far as I understood, it was also you can say it's something like a hotspot of modern architects, which was attractive for many architects to take part in competition, to try to work there. You mentioned some of the names, so it was an explorative area there which was open for experiments, and these experiments, they were appreciated by people, by politicians. They were supported, so it was a predominating tendency or currency which was totally modern, and that's very interesting. It's really, and you see it was only a short term, then it was changed. And my question was, what were the reasons that the capital status was changed from Charkiv to Kiev? What is the political background to understand?
It was a political, but I don't know what kind of reasons. I don't know. Maybe Kharkiv was too revolution. To something, because the politics was changed, do you see, so dramatically in that period. And Ukrainization was stopped also in that period at the same time. And you heard about so many people who sent it in
I found it very impressive, the statistics. This was the first time I saw that how fast Charkiv was growing, actually, much faster than Moscow, so as a city, so it became a very strong
I
city.
took these numbers from the archives and documents, so it's absolutely...
You mentioned that it was, let's say, it was the avant-garde region for avant-garde architecture, Ukraine and Charkiv. And my question is this kind of architecture of the constructivism or of this avant-garde architecture, how is it estimated later and what is protected? For example, you mentioned the dam and the factories and the tractor factories and all these things. And my question is this protected? Is it listed? Is it registered as heritage? So it is not understood or appreciated as heritage, at least by those who are responsible for heritage conservation.
No, unfortunately not. When I wrote my dissertation in the 2016-17, I tried to find how many objects were listed in our national heritage list. Nothing. Sorry.
Neither on the lowest, nor on the middle, nor on the highest.
No, only as local heritage.
In the city, on the city level.
But but it is very easy to throw it away because of the money, business, and so on. So just only in 2017, the Sprom put in the tentative list, but I'm not sure that it is possible that it will be put in the main list because of some problems with authenticity of that building.
Yeah, and maybe other reasons. We know that UNESCO and tentative list and is also a very political issue, but it would be, of course, a very important signal towards that. But maybe coming back, you also said that actually, I mean, now, of course, the destruction is happening mainly because of the war, but also you said it was time, people, and war that was destroying the buildings. I mean, what is would you say, the status in general? Are most of these buildings neglected? They are not listed, they are not protected. So what was the situation before the war also? For example, the many residential buildings, how was the status? So they were degenerating.
Some of these buildings have local protection, but unfortunately nobody worried about it. And when owners changed facades and windows, balcony, and so on, nobody do something.
Okay, so those who are with us and attending the meeting via YouTube, they are not able to participate here, but the audience, of course, is cordially invited, and I saw that the hand was raised by Ben. Maybe we can have your question, and all the others are invited, of course, to participate.
A question, Svetlana. You told that the Der Sprung was the only huge ensemble that was not redesigned in the neoclassical style during the Stalin era. Did this redesign happen to many constructive structures in Ukraine? And is this an issue that is or might now be discussed as a label of cultural identity? And might this possibly help to have more attention to this heroic modernist architecture in Ukraine if it comes to rebuild or to evaluate this value as a cultural asset?
Maybe I can add a question which is similar. My question is Der Sprung, is it looked upon as a Soviet heritage, as a Russian heritage, or is it maybe the Ukrainian heritage?
There's maybe a contradiction in modernity and internationalism and the policy in the Soviet Union to create a national culture in the different parts of states of the Union. So we have this problem in the new national states in Eastern Europe and in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary or Romania, where there is this contradiction. There's this will to express the modernity with industrialization and looking forward, the new man, and the nostalgia for the future and not for the past. And then in the Stalinist area, exactly in 1933, there was a shift because national policy, nationalization was not against the Soviet Union, and it was a way of make the politics more popular. So internationalism was something.
I think that I can understand it, but I wanted to ask the local, so to say, because we knew some of the narratives, and that the question is, how is society reacting, appreciating, appropriating this kind of heritage, or what are the obstacles to say that's our heritage as well, and even if it has been to make it popular, of course.
Was it popular?
Is there a chance today? We have modern architecture which became popular today. We have slab constructions, they are popular today. They were not 20 years ago. So that is what I'm thinking about, this kind of process, to not to try to get rid of it or to continue the underestimation of the past, but to have a different approach. And what could be interesting, because you were mentioning, and you were mentioning as well, the tentative list for UNESCO. And on the tentative list for UNESCO, there is no 20th century heritage at all from Ukraine, except of Der Sprung. And from Russia, there is nothing. So there is no Narkomfin, there is neither Moscow nor Leningrad, nothing is represented. So it could be interesting to say the most avant-garde region in the Soviet Union was Ukraine, and there it was Charkiv. And this avant-garde position is part of a World Heritage politic which should be made or which can be contributed by, for example, by the Foreign Ministry. That is why I'm interested in this small segment and how people or those who are responsible can be enabled to identify themselves with this part of the history. Is it possible?
Do you see, people don't understand it enough deep. They don't understand the value of that objects. Because our authorities don't worry about it and don't tell about the value about the value of this object, and maybe because so many objects were there. Do you see? You see it every day. It seems it is not so important for you. It is so usual for you, everyday architecture. And now the people changed so much modern architecture that I could not maybe find one real authentic object in Charkiv, which was full of them.
So when you say people, you mean the inhabit population in Charkiv or in Ukraine. And but maybe coming back to Gazprom, because it was so famous, I mean worldwide, I would say, is also that building does not have a specific role or function. I mean, of course, it is also part of the place, which is so.
It is one of the symbols of Charkiv. Because of that, all people know.
But more because it is a symbol, and this whole place is so specific. But you think not maybe in particular because of its constructivist history or appearance and design.
You see, our population and our architects, and maybe, I hope, our authorities looks to the West and believe the Western specialists, and maybe if European scientists tell them more about how it is
and I think your presentation made it very clear what was this role in that time, in this very short period, how extraordinary it was. And well, I would even dare to say, because you asked the question, but I'm not a historian, of course, that this strength of the city of Charkiv as a city and as a symbol of dynamic was really threatening, I would say, for maybe Moscow at that time. So this moved to Kiev. But maybe it would be interesting. So you just mentioned. So we should talk more about it, and of course the whole discussion about also the tentative list, but also this importance. I mean, I guess there will be more publications about it, and I'm quite sure that the discussion, once UNESCO continues the discussion on World Heritage lists. At the moment, I think it's a bit frozen. So this has to be promoted. So you think this will help? So that means that institutions like e-commerce, like Docomomo, we should do more about it to bring it back to the faces and back to the public discussion.
Yes, and especially maybe in these times when we are discussing the destruction and what has been destroyed in Ukraine and how to rebuild it, we do not discuss about the contribution of Ukraine to modern architecture of 20th century. And maybe we have the chance, we have a gift. It has not been heavily destroyed and destructed by World War II. It has not been destroyed or overshaped in the Stalinist, in the sense of socialist realism or classicist architecture, and we have it. It's damaged, yes, and it's a question of authenticity, but it's unique, and it's an icon of modern city planning. This square there, it's when I saw it, it was. Fantastic! It's fantastic, and I think we should make people aware that there are many problems with World Heritage sites, with sites which are already nominated on the tentative list. But there is one unique contribution to world architecture of 20th century, that is der Sprung, and that is why I'm trying to discuss this issue, how it can be improved and how it could be supported by us or by, let's call them the scientific.
The more the discussion focuses on der Sprung, we should ask about the original substance of this complex. You might know that during the World War II, the front line changed or came over Charkow several times. So it was taken over by the Germans, lost, and a second time taken over by the Germans. And I remember that I have seen lots of photographs where the Ashram building was shown heavily destroyed. So it has been destroyed, partly, heavily, I'm not sure about that. So that's my question to the referent, how much original substance you can find inside this building, let's say during the Soviet times, not after the 90s or even today.
Your question about authenticity of Держпром, yes? Mm-hmm. Do you see, Держпроm is so big, complex, and when they were built, it was created a special group of people who should repair it, do something with it because it is so huge. And that people who factually built this building and knew it very, very good, they returned after World War II and repaired it, reconstructed, rebuilt it factually in authentic way, you see. Because of that, maybe it has so nice quality. But later, I told about it in another my lecture. Do you see? In 2005, it was a meeting about to put Держпром in the list of UNESCO list. And just before that, our authorities changed all of frame windows, wooden windows. Of course, it was from 1950s, but not all of them. It had even the door handles, authentic, with Держпром, with that word, you see. And they threw it away and put plastic. All buildings, do you see? And later they changed plaster of the facade and painted in a gray. So, do you see? And there were 13 original lifts there, because it is high-rise buildings. It was produced in Leningrad in special factories in at the end of 20s, and brought in Charkiv. And now just only one exists. But so do you see, not only war,
But I think your question also, or the discussion on the value of this building and the square, I think also goes beyond authenticity, which is of course also a discussion. I would say there are so many other values which play a role here, like commemorative, like social value,
yes,
the technology value, the innovation that was come with that, the urban planning, so that in total this sums up. I mean, next to the traditional let's say, discussion on authenticity, because still the complex has its modern appearance despite the changes that were made.
And we should stop to ruin authenticity of that.
It's a pity that after 1991, so many losses we have to register and to see. But on the other hand, I think the question of authenticity is not only related to the original state of the building time. It's part of the history. And that is why we can go through World Heritage Sites in Germany, and we will see different windows. We see rebuilt synagogues, which do not only in the exterior, they do look like the other ones. So it's always a question, what this building and the society, what they have suffered and what they did to continue. And there is a high degree of continuation, but it's fascinating because there were a lot of historic events which could have been treated or registered as obstacles, for example, World War II, but also the rebuilding and so on. And there is a public appreciation to keep it as it is. And even after 1990, it is modernized, and it's not good, but it's not reshaped, not yet. Yeah. Not reshaped in the sense of decoration or of historic elements or things like this. It's still there, and it is an urban complex. It's not a single monument. It's not the Haus Schminke or something like this. It's an urban complex, and that is really fascinating. And that is because it's not surrounded by higher-rised new buildings, and that is why it works as a city crown. Im Sinne von Stadtkrone is it wahrnehmbar.
Maybe, but would like to maybe address some of the other. I think, of course, we agree somehow on the importance of Gazprom. But for example, in the very beginning, you showed this Dnieper power station. Yes. So I would like to know what is the situation of these things that probably, kept in functioning, so they were still in place, which is always a good thing somehow for heritage if it stays in place. But has this, for example, been heavily changed, or is it still in the situation? How was it maintained? How does it look like nowadays? Do you have information about that?
Yes, of course. And I want to involve Thomas Lear to discussion, because he visited that dam, that Zaporož'e, and can help me even in German. Yes, Thomas, please.
We have the same situation as the Gazprom building, because the German came and destroyed these near progress, and the Soviets rebuilt it after the war, but in a good situation. And now we have the situation that the communist symbols, the Soviet star, is covered. You cannot see, but it doesn't exist. And in my mind, it is a good situation, but it's very dangerous because it's a military object, as it was during the Second World War. So it is now at the same time.
And the interior of the hydroelectric station is the same as in the 1930s.
We have really main problems of restoration and protection of the documents, and maybe it could be a German gift to help to maintain, to enforce a new understanding of protection of World Heritage listed or not listed, not yet listed objects in Ukraine. the other side of missiles.
Yeah, because I must say, for me, this was so symbolic. If you see this, which was also at the beginning of this whole period, I mean, to produce the energy that is needed for industrialization. So it is a very strong symbol. And I mean, we were just discussing that at the moment. I know from organizations like Econem, who try also to document destruction, that they say, when we collaborate with the cultural ministry in Ukraine, we only get historic objects. So there is no information about any of those modern or constructivist buildings. So they ask us as Docomomo now to say, can you give us an overview, a list of these buildings, inclusive data and addresses, so that we can direct our drone flyers to these objects to document the current status. So this shows, I think, quite well what you say, that in a way the international appreciation there is much bigger.
We have to look for the value, for the intrinsic value, containing different. It's many symbols. It's not one symbol. It's
it's many objects, but I just wanted to say we concentrate very much on Gazprom because we know so much about it, and it has been put to the public, but there are so many other objects also in other cities.
I don't have time for that.
Yeah. But there
are many another objects in Dnipro city.
Yeah. So we really want to put together this list now quite quickly. I mean, but some of the objects are already they are documented in many websites in Ukraine, in different publications, but they are not really collected together in a way that they could be easily found, so that they could be distributed. And I think we will do that for sure for the Docomomo journal, but then we have to find a way also to communicate and transfer this data to the people who could take care of the documentation.
Isn't there this website Constructors in Charkiv, which is quite a good resource? And
there are several, I think, Ukraine websites. I think this is one. There are also others. So some of the buildings are there, but I'm not sure if all.
20 dozens of buildings would be listed in Germany immediately, like the Palace of the Railway Workers or the Post Office. These are all icons that should be listed.
This is a real icons, post office, because it was a very important building for modernism in Ukraine. When it was start to build, it was a very big discussion in mass media, Kharkiv mass media, and some people did not want to protest it from that building, and some of them, of course, protected. And so at the end of that discussion, it was a very big meeting in August, it seems to me, 1928. And so many people, 800 people arrived from, not only from Kharkiv, from Poltava, from Odessa, from Kiev. And after that meeting, they decided that in Kharkiv, it will be only modern architecture. So, yes. So since 1998, since that building, till the end of modernism, in Kharkiv, it should be only modernist architecture. And of course, Kharkiv was an icon for another cities of Ukrainian cities. So it was a high point
I don't know, are there further questions from the audience? Because actually this was maybe a very nice way to conclude that so there is a recognition actually for that, and I think what we can take with us is that we have to do some work to bring the Gazprom again more to the public attention and maybe also to the authorities, but in addition that there are many other buildings that we again have to
really I worried that only Gazprom put in that list, because you see now this our authorities allowed in 2012. It was a football
football match.
Football match.
Championship, yeah.
You see, and they erected a terrible big hotel, new hotel in that square. You see, if we put only Gazprom, what will happen with another building? So that
but it would be a starting point. It would be a starting point because it is so iconic. But I agree. What you want to say is that it also needs the buffer zone, the ensemble, the whole urban context. So we should directly aim for more, not just. Maybe that could be something. So we should aim for more, not only for Gazprom.
I think we can agree, and would like to ask the host that we can continue this discussion because it was very fruitful with your contribution, maybe with other colleagues and experts from here. And Max Lingner House is a nice place to meet and to discuss this issue. So we will not invite ourselves cordially to the house, but maybe it can be continued next year with other activities. So thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much for joining us for the question. Thank you very much for moderating and co-moderating,
yes,
and also for the new documentation on modern architecture or modern heritage in Ukraine. I think that will be represented when?
Yeah, exactly. So we have to say there are many more events to come, and we hope that the Docomomo journal with the article of Svetlana will be published in early December, and that hopefully we can make a presentation here in Berlin together with Triennale of the Modern in mid-December with the printed versions, and we'll have further discussions on also Ukraine and the protection, and I hope we have taken some more steps.
This is also something I want to announce, that currently the Triennial of Modernism is a festival that is still running until December, and luckily we got public funding on short notice by the German Building Ministry to put up 5 exhibitions about Ukrainian modernism. The first one is already running on Ernst-Reuter-Platz at the glass pavilion called Bauhaus Reuse, and there will be 4 other ones. One will be hosted at the architectural building at the Technical University in Berlin, and the others will also be on Ernst-Reuter-Platz. So I all invite you to take some of these leaflets and have a look at the website, because since this is all put together on short notice, the website will be more accurate, and there will also be an exhibition curated and hosted by Svetlana. I don't know exactly when it will be. I think 12th November or something like that. I think this is the schedule.
Schluss jetzt mit der Werbung. Vielen Dank für den Vortrag. Большое спасибо тебе, Daniel. Und es ist in der Tat so, jetzt sagen wir als Hausherren hier mal was, dass wir im April nächsten Jahres versuchen, Tage der osteuropäischen sozialistischen Moderne zu veranstalten. Und insofern würde ich mich sehr freuen, wenn wir hier auch in dieser Zusammensetzung weiter an so einer Liste arbeiten.
Ja.
Kommen Sie wieder, sagen Sie es weiter. Vielen Dank, schönen Abend.
Okay.
Wir kommen